Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of a brand new series. We're going to be talking about the seas, and specifically islands in RuneScape. Today, I want to go over the existing islands in RuneScape and talk about how I might change them just a little bit. Most of the islands, I feel, were just placed there because put it in the water, we're never really going to look at it. You take a boat to get there. They never really thought you were going to be on the seas. So, if some of these islands were placed a little bit more proactively to accommodate the sailing update that'll be coming soon, what would that look like? And first and foremost, I always want to give this good old jump scare of this is what the world looks like without any islands. Basically taking away any islands that aren't incredibly landlocked, like you might be able to see some at the very tippy top, like that volcano, or over here by the desert, and even Salmon Crab Isle. So real quick before we change around a couple of islands, I want to talk about the criteria that might be important for islands before we start changing them around willy-nilly. Certain things to take into consideration could be something like, are the surrounding land masses similar environments? Like, it really wouldn't make sense to have an icy island if it was right next to the desert. And in the same vein, it probably shouldn't be super tropical if it's right next to the swamp or wilderness. What size of ship can pass through islands if they're close together? Specifically looking at the Lunar Isles or any islands that might be added in the future. But there could be a size requirement that only smaller ships might be able to get through. And that might be something that we could fix, because bigger ships are likely going to be for higher level things. The third most important thing is, does the lore support or refute its location? Does it make sense in the game world that it is where it is? It really wouldn't make sense if the Lunar Isles was down by Mosla Harmlos, and vice versa. And the last thing to consider, but it may not be very important, is the place you find it on the mainland, close-ish. Because leaving from Fremennik to the Lunar Isles makes sense. But if you were going to leave from Fremennik to go all the way to the desert, I don't know if the Viking boats are going to make that trip for you. But now let's take a look at what the world would look like with a couple more islands maybe changed around in a few places. Taking a look at the map, you'll be able to see a couple of changes around. Most notable is probably the fact that we switched around Soul Wars and Fossil Island. And that's really just because I thought that Soul Wars' environment was a little bit closer to that of Mortania and the Wilderness. And in the exact same vein, Fossil Island goes well with Flepided Hills and the Zolra Swamp. There's even a lava portion to make it close to the volcano's environment as well. Since we're talking about Fossil Island, let's just get right to it. It's right next to Zolra, and your first thought might be, that's pretty far away from the dig site. But if you look at the dig site, it was already pretty far away from the dig site in the first place. It doesn't really matter where it is as long as it's close relative to Lithcrin, which it is now. And it always kind of bothered me that the environment of the volcano and Lithcrin were same environment, but they were on the exact opposite side of islands. So it didn't really make sense that those environments were the same, but so far away from each other. So they're now on the same side and close to the lava near Flepided Hills. Taking a look at Soul Wars, we've also got it right over here in the corner. It looks almost like it could have parted from this chunk of land, to be honest. It's a dark green reminiscent of Mortania. And hooking around to the top here, we've got the massive Bounty Hunter Arena, a gigantic volcano. It was put next to the volcano, but I thought it would be better to just center it right above the wilderness. And maybe that could even be huge scenery for those who are doing Mage Training Arena. Because I doubt a lot of people would be able to see the Bounty Hunter Arena from the volcano. And that doesn't even say how many people would frequent the volcano within the wilderness just to see the Bounty Hunter Arena. Continuing our journey over, we've got the Lunar Isles. And a lot of these islands were totally fine. There's no real reason to move them, except maybe to space them out just a bit, or maybe just make them a little bit closer to Kourend. The reason why is just to make it so you can slip in between the lunar isles more efficiently with likely your large ships that you're going to need in these dangerous areas. Going over to Mostly Harmless, and it's basically unscathed. I put a little island right next to it because I thought that would look nice to it. But honestly, good placement, Mostly Harmless. But instead, we're going to talk about Temperos because that was not good. That was not good at all. Temperos is an undersea spirit. It is the embodiment of a ocean's storm. Why was that locked between two gigantic land masses? I put it at the very least in the middle here, but in all reality, Temperos's cove should be much farther under Ape Atoll, and even the desert. But we need a little bit bigger of a map for that. But another thing that was weird, they had the same thought I had for Temperos's Cove, but for the Void Knight's Island. That thing was so far away from anywhere important that you barely even knew where it was on the map. And it's a man-made thing. There are so many ports on every angle of it that it makes sense that that would be between two land masses, not Temperos. So I put that where Temperos was. And we're going to be heading into Ape Atoll. Ape Atoll was actually perfectly fine, but one tiny tweak that I thought would make this seem a little bit more cohesive is I just gave it a flip. I made the sandy parts of Ape Atoll point at the continent that we are coming from, because it really only makes sense that you would dock at the closest shore that you could find. You wouldn't go all the way around the island just to dock. And then we're going to go down here into the corner. The funny thing about this corner is it was just a template for the smaller islands that I've tried to place all around the greater landmass, just to make it feel like a little bit more lived in, because these islands should necessarily be like stopping points for resource gathering, treasure chests like X marks the spot, or honestly just scenery to make sure the water's not boring when we're on it. But down here in the corner, it was just my template for a bunch of little islands that I was using for later. And eventually I was like, that does look like shit, but it should be an archipelago that we're able to glide in and out of all of these different islands and points of interest. And I think a great archipelago that we're able to lead ourselves through would be really cool to add in. But that's just my 2 cents about the islands of RuneScape that we currently have. I just think there should be a few smaller islands for scenery, space some of our islands out so it's a little bit easier to navigate between them, change the narrative location of a couple of islands to make them fit a bit better, like Temperos, and just swap Soul Wars and Fossil Island because of the environmental locations of the surrounding landmasses matching much better. But if you guys got any suggestions, or if I actually forgot some islands somewhere, let me know. But until next time, everybody, I will see you all later. And don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe.